a Marine fighter jet, a drone bearing down on an American aircraft carrier, and then an actual kill shot confirmed by the Pentagon itself. That's real. That happened. But that's only half of today's story, because there's a second thread running through the same stretch of water that's genuinely stranger, and nobody in Washington has fully explained it yet. Stick with me through this one, because I'm going to walk you through both halves carefully, what's confirmed with names and squadron numbers attached, and what's still sitting in a genuine gray zone with no official explanation at all. By the end, I think you'll understand exactly why one of these stories has a clean ending and the other one genuinely doesn't yet. Ryan here, Max Afterburner, former F-15E combat pilot, former F-16 Thunderbird, flying airliners these days. Today we're talking 5th generation stealth fighters, a confirmed combat kill, and a pattern of unexplained emergencies that's got aviation analysts genuinely asking hard questions. Let's get into it, carefully, because a story with this many layers deserves exactly that kind of care, rather than a rushed, oversimplified version. Let's start with what's fully confirmed, because it's genuinely one of the more dramatic moments of this entire war, and it deserves to be told in full detail before we get into the stranger half of this story. According to USNI News, a Marine F-35C Lightning II shot down an Iranian military drone that approached the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, an actual air-to-air kill by a stealth fighter defending a carrier. CENTCOM's own statement was direct about what happened. The Iranian drone, identified as a Shahed-139, continued flying toward the ship despite what the statement called de-escalatory measures taken by U.S. forces operating in international waters. Translation: America gave that drone every chance to turn around. It didn't. The Lincoln was operating roughly 500 miles from Iran's southern coast at the time. 500 miles. That's how far this specific threat reached before American air power ended it, which tells you something important about the range Iran is now willing to operate at, well beyond its own immediate coastal waters. The fighter belonged to the Black Knights, Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 314, the only F-35C unit assigned a carrier Air Wing 9 aboard the Lincoln. That's not an anonymous asset either. It's a specific, named squadron with a real operational history, executing exactly the mission it was designed and trained for. No American service members were harmed, no damage to the ship. A clean textbook intercept against a genuine closing threat. But here's the detail that actually explains why this happened in the first place. And it's the part most headlines skip entirely. This drone shoot-down didn't happen in isolation. It happened right after the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy attempted to seize a U.S.-flagged oil tanker sailing straight through the Strait of Hormuz, an entirely separate incident that set off the whole sequence of events in the first place. 2 IRGCN boats and an Iranian Mohijer drone approached the tanker, called the Stena Imperative, and threatened to board and seize it outright, according to CENTCOM's own account of the incident. Think about that sequence. First, an attempted seizure of an American-flagged commercial vessel. Then, a drone approaching the carrier protecting that same stretch of water. Then, a stealth fighter ending the threat mid-air. 3 connected events unfolding within a short window, each one escalating the stakes just a little further than the last, and each one telling you something about how quickly a routine patrol day in this theater can turn into an actual shooting engagement. It's worth pausing on just how deliberately paced that escalation actually was, too. This wasn't a single chaotic moment where everything happened at once. It was a sequence, an attempted boarding, a naval response, a drone threat emerging separately, and finally an air-to-air engagement, each stage handled by a different asset specifically suited to that exact threat. That's not luck. That's the kind of layered, coordinated defense architecture that takes real planning and real training to execute cleanly under actual combat pressure, rather than in a controlled training exercise back home. CENTCOM spokesperson Captain Tim Hawkins confirmed the tanker details directly to USNI News, laying out the timeline clearly for reporters rather than leaving it vague. The USS McFaul, an independently deployed destroyer already in the Persian Gulf, responded to the attempted seizure and escorted the tanker to safety, which tells you the Navy already had assets positioned close enough to respond within the same operational window, rather than scrambling from somewhere distant. So that's the confirmed half of this story. A real seizure attempt, a real drone threat, a real documented kill by a 5th-generation stealth fighter defending a U.S. carrier group. That part isn't in dispute. That part is on the record, straight from CENTCOM with names, squadron numbers, and a clear public statement attached to it. Now let's get into the part that's genuinely stranger, and where I need you to slow down with me, because this next thread has never been fully explained by anyone in an official capacity, and I think that unresolved uncertainty is actually more interesting than a clean answer would be. Starting back in May, a pattern began. A U.S. Air Force F-35A Lightning II squawked emergency transponder code 7700 while flying over the Sea of Oman, right near the Strait of Hormuz. Code 7700. That's the international standard for a general in-flight emergency. Immediate priority required. The The same code any commercial airliner would transmit if something went seriously wrong mid-flight. According to Turkey Today's reporting, this specific incident happened on May 10th, and the cause was, in their own words, not immediately clear. Not immediately clear? That phrase is going to come up again in this story more than once, and I think that repetition itself tells you something about how little official clarity has actually emerged since this all started. Flight tracking data from Flight Radar 24, an open-source aviation tracking platform anyone can access, showed the aircraft heading toward UAE airspace. Then the transponder went dark, a common practice either during a sensitive military operation or right after safe landing. Nobody outside the military knew for certain which one it was, and that ambiguity is exactly the kind of gap that tends to get filled with speculation rather than fact. Here's the thing about that emergency code specifically. It doesn't tell you what's wrong. Mechanical failure, a medical issue on board, even combat damage, all of those trigger the exact same signal. The code just tells air traffic control that whatever's happening, it's serious enough to need help immediately, without specifying anything more granular than that, which is exactly why this code shows up in such wildly different scenarios across civil and military aviation alike, from a bird strike on a commercial airliner to a genuine battle damage emergency on a fighter jet operating over hostile territory. That ambiguity is actually built into the system on purpose. In the middle of an actual emergency, a pilot's top priority is getting on the ground safely, not narrating the specific cause of the problem over the radio while trying to fly a damaged or malfunctioning aircraft. So the code exists specifically to cut through all of that immediately, get every available resource moving to help this aircraft land, and sort out exactly what happened afterward once everyone is safely back on the ground and there's time for a full investigation. That design logic makes total sense from a flight safety standpoint, but it also means that from the outside looking in, watching this unfold purely through flight tracking data and foreign state media reporting, you're left with almost no useful information about what actually happened beyond the bare fact that something serious occurred. That's precisely the gap that speculation rushes to fill, and it's precisely why I think it's worth being so careful and deliberate about not filling that gap myself with anything beyond what's actually been confirmed. Iran's own state media outlets, Fars News Agency and Tasnim, were the ones who actually reported this incident publicly first. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it matters for how you weigh this story going forward. An American aircraft's emergency, first reported to the world through Iranian state media, not through the U.S. Air Force. The United States never confirmed the incident at all, not that day, not in the weeks that followed. That gap right there, between what actually happened and what either government was willing to say about it, is exactly where speculation started pouring in, and it's exactly the kind of vacuum that tends to get filled by whichever voice is loudest, rather than whichever voice is most accurate. This wasn't a one-time event either. According to Defense Security Asia's detailed reporting, a second F-35A transmitted the exact same emergency code, 70700, before landing safely at Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE on June 11th. Same code, same general region, a different aircraft, weeks later following what appears to be an eerily similar pattern to the first incident. And this specific report noted something that should genuinely catch your attention. The June 11th emergency marked at least the third publicly tracked F-35A incident over Gulf region airspace during that same stretch of months. The third, not the first, the third. A number that turns what might otherwise look like an isolated, forgettable incident into something that genuinely deserves closer scrutiny. Let that sink in for a second. 3 separate emergency declarations from America's most advanced stealth fighter over the exact same contested airspace in a matter of weeks, each one following a strikingly similar pattern of an unexplained squawk, a safe landing, and total official silence afterward. Defense Security. Asia's own analysis was careful and measured about this, and I think their framing is exactly the right one to borrow here. No independently verified evidence currently supports claims that any of these F-35s encountered hostile fire. No verified evidence. I want to repeat that clearly, because it's the single most important sentence in this entire half of the story, and it's the one detail I don't want you walking away from this video without remembering. But, and this is the honest, complicating part, the timing of these repeated incidents nevertheless amplified regional information warfare narratives, with Iranian and Russian-aligned channels rapidly framing each emergency as evidence of mounting pressure against you. Stealth aircraft specifically, pushing that narrative hard across social media and state broadcast channels alike. So you've got 2 competing explanations sitting side by side right now, and nobody outside a very small circle actually knows which one is true. One explanation is mundane, purely mechanical strain from an incredibly demanding deployment tempo. The other explanation is much more alarming, some kind of undisclosed threat actually reaching one of the most advanced fighter jets ever built, a jet whose entire design philosophy is built around never being detected in the first place. I'm not going to pretend I know which one it is. Nobody credible actually does right now, and I think any channel claiming otherwise is selling you certainty it simply doesn't have access to. What we do know is the broader operational picture these jets have been flying inside of, and I think that context genuinely matters here, maybe more than any single incident on its own. According to a live maritime tracking source monitoring this exact crisis, as of early July, the Strait of Hormuz was operationally open again, but at a fraction of normal capacity, something like 35 transits a day against a pre-war average closer to 110, a third of normal traffic, through the world's single most important oil choke point, months into an active war that shows no sign of fully resolving. During the worst of the blockade earlier this year, that number had collapsed to near zero for you. Allied shipping entirely, pushing Brent crude above $116 a barrel and triggering what several governments formally called a global energy emergency. A genuinely rare designation that tells you how seriously this crisis was actually being treated at the highest levels of international policy. That's the pressure cooker environment these F-35s have been operating inside of non-stop, month after month, defending tanker escorts, patrolling contested airspace, and apparently, at least 3 separate times, declaring genuine in-flight emergencies for reasons that still haven't been publicly explained to anyone outside the chain of command directly involved. Let's talk about what that kind of sustained operational tempo actually does to a 5th-generation stealth fighter, because I think this is where the mundane explanation actually gets a lot more credible the more you understand it, and I want to walk you through the actual mechanics rather than just asserting it. The F-35 is an extraordinarily complex machine, arguably the most complex fighter aircraft ever put into mass production. Stealth coatings require constant, meticulous maintenance, reapplied and inspected regularly because even small imperfections can compromise the aircraft's radar signature. Sensor fusion systems, cooling systems, engine components engineered for razor-thin tolerances, all of it gets pushed harder during sustained combat operations than during any peacetime training cycle back home. Fly that same handful of jets on tanker escort missions, carrier defense patrols, and contested airspace sorties for months without a real pause. And mechanical strain isn't some exotic explanation. It's honestly the expected one, the kind of wear and tear that maintenance crews plan for even under normal circumstances, let alone an unusually demanding wartime deployment tempo like this one. Defense security. Asia's own analysis made exactly this point, describing growing analytical interest in what they called the cumulative operational burden being placed on deployed stealth fighter detachments, specifically because of how repeatedly these jets have been tasked throughout this entire war, flying sortie after sortie with limited opportunity for the kind of deep, extended maintenance cycles these aircraft are typically built around. That's not a dramatic story. It's not the kind of thing that gets a viral headline on its own. Mechanical fatigue from overuse rarely does. But it might genuinely be the most likely explanation sitting underneath all 3 of these emergencies, especially once you account for just how few F-35 units are actually available to rotate through this specific theater at any given time. Energy security analysts have separately noted that any sustained military disruption around the Strait of Hormuz could threaten maritime trade flows exceeding several $1 trillion annually, which helps explain why the operational demand on these specific aircraft has stayed so relentlessly high throughout this entire conflict. There simply hasn't been much room in the mission schedule for the kind of extended downtime these jets would normally get during peacetime. At the same time, I don't think it's responsible to just wave away the other possibility either, especially given everything else we've documented happening in this exact stretch of airspace throughout this war, because this theater has a real confirmed track record of hostile losses that can't just be ignored. According to a documented list of aviation losses during this entire conflict, this exact region has already seen real, confirmed combat losses involving other aircraft types. A U.S. Army Apache helicopter was shot down near the Strait of Hormuz on June 8th, with both pilots rescued using an autonomous sea drone, a rescue I've actually covered in detail on this channel before. An MQ-9 Reaper drone was shot down the very next night over Iranian territory, near Jam in Bushehr province. Back in April, an A-10 Thunderbolt was shot down by Iranian fire, with the pilot ejecting over the strait and being rescued by a dedicated combat search and rescue mission that also involved an A-10 escort providing cover for the recovery. There's more too. A Boeing CH-47 Chinook helicopter was destroyed on the ground in Kuwait during an Iranian drone attack that same week in April. And in July, a U.S. Navy Sikorsky SH-60 Seahawk helicopter assigned to the USS George H. W. Bush crashed over the Arabian Sea, with 3 of the 4 crew members involved in that incident. So this isn't a theater where aircraft never faced genuine hostile fire. It's a theater that's already produced multiple confirmed shoot-downs and confirmed losses across multiple aircraft types throughout this same war, helicopters, drones, and fixed-wing attack aircraft alike. each one independently documented and confirmed rather than left as speculation. That history is exactly why 3 unexplained F-35 emergencies in that same specific stretch of airspace can't be dismissed instantly as pure coincidence either, even without a shred of confirmed evidence tying them to enemy action. When a theater has already produced this many confirmed hostile losses across this many different aircraft types, an unexplained emergency involving your most advanced platform deserves genuine scrutiny rather than an automatic, comfortable assumption that it must be mechanical. That's the tension sitting at the center of this entire story. A real documented pattern of hostile losses in this exact airspace on one side, and 0 verified evidence connecting any of these specific F-35 incidents to that same pattern on the other. Both facts are true simultaneously, and I think pretending either one away just to land on a cleaner, more satisfying conclusion would be doing you a real disservice. Before I keep going, I want to ask you directly for something, because putting together a story this layered, cross-referencing US and I news, CENTCOM's own statements, Turkey Today, WION, Defense Security Asia, CNN, and Iranian state media's own initial reporting takes real time and real care. If that kind of properly sourced breakdown is what brings you to this channel, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because both threads of this story, the confirmed shootdown and the unexplained emergency pattern, are genuinely still developing, and I don't think either one is anywhere close to a final chapter yet. I'd also point out, if you've been following our other coverage of this war, the Strait of Hormuz operations, the Mosquito Fleet engagement, the Jordan attacks, the Kharg Island pressure campaign, this F-35 story sits right at the intersection of almost everything else we've covered, because it's the exact same airspace, the exact same overstretched theater, and in some cases, literally the same week as several of those other incidents. If you want the fuller picture of just how much pressure this entire region has been under simultaneously, those other videos will fill in a lot of the surrounding context that makes this specific story land even harder. I know some of you watching have real background in military aviation, and I genuinely value hearing from anyone who's worked around 5th-generation fighter maintenance specifically, because I think that first-hand perspective would add something to this conversation that no amount of outside reporting can fully replicate. Sustained combat deployment tempo affects different aircraft types differently, and I'd rather hear directly from people who've actually lived that reality than just speculate about it from the outside looking in. Let me give you my honest tactical read on all of this, because I think there's a real important distinction hiding inside these two halves of the story, and I think working through it carefully is more valuable than just handing you a conclusion. The confirmed drone shootdown tells you something clear and specific about how this war is actually being fought right now. Iran is testing American naval defenses directly, probing with drones, probing with attempted tanker seizures, and American forces are responding with exactly the kind of overwhelming, precise capability the F-35 was built to provide. That's a story with a clean beginning, middle, and end, all confirmed, all on the record, straight from the people who were actually there. The emergency squawk pattern tells you something completely different, and honestly, more uncomfortable. It tells you that even America's most advanced tactical aircraft isn't operating in this environment without real, unresolved questions attached to it, whether those questions end up pointing towards simple mechanical fatigue or something more serious that hasn't been publicly acknowledged yet. Both of those truths can exist inside the exact same stretch of airspace, on the exact same aircraft type, in the exact same war. That's not a contradiction. That's just what modern sustained combat aviation actually looks like when you strip away the clean, simple headline version of events and look at the full, messy picture underneath. I also want to point out something about how each side of this story spreads information differently, because I think it's genuinely instructive and it's a pattern worth watching for in future coverage of this war too. When America wants credit for a confirmed success, like that drone shootdown, CENTCOM puts out a direct, on-the-record statement within days, complete with squadron names, aircraft types, and a clear public timeline. When something goes wrong, or even just looks uncertain, like these emergency squawks, the silence from official channels has been almost total, leaving Iranian and Russian-aligned media to fill that vacuum with whatever narrative serves them best. That's not necessarily evidence of a cover-up. Militaries routinely stay quiet about incidents under investigation, for all kinds of legitimate operational security reasons, protecting sensitive maintenance data, avoiding tipping off an adversary about a specific vulnerability, or simply following standard protocol while an internal review is still ongoing. But it does mean that, in the absence of official clarity, the loudest voices explaining what happened are often the ones with the least reason to be accurate, and the most reason to spin the story in whatever direction benefits them politically. That's exactly why I think it matters so much to separate confirmed fact from speculation as clearly as I've tried to do throughout this entire video. because the less official information exists about a story, the more room there is for exactly the kind of dramatic, unverified claims that spread fastest online and that tend to get repeated as fact long after anyone bothers to check whether they were ever actually confirmed in the first place. So here's my bottom line. A Marine F-35C really did shoot down an Iranian drone threatening a U.S. carrier, confirmed directly by CENTCOM, following a real, documented attempted seizure of an American-flagged tanker. That part of the story is clean, verified, and genuinely remarkable on its own. Exactly the kind of decisive professional military operation that showcases what this platform was actually designed to do when the moment calls for it. Separately, at least 3 U.S. Air Force F-35As have declared unexplained in-flight emergencies over the same contested stretch of airspace since May, with no confirmed cause, no official USO statement, and no verified evidence of hostile fire, despite plenty of speculation from sources with a clear interest in pushing that exact narrative for their own political purposes. The most likely explanation, based on everything we actually know about sustained combat deployment tempo and the sheer mechanical complexity of this specific aircraft, still points toward operational strain rather than enemy action, but I want to be honest, that likely isn't the same thing as confirmed, and I don't think anyone watching this video should walk away treating it as settled. Two very different stories. Same aircraft type, same war. And only one of them has actually been resolved with a clear, confirmed explanation so far, while the other remains a genuine open question that I don't think deserves a false sense of closure just because it would make for a more satisfying ending. I think that's actually the more honest place to leave this story than pretending I've got it all figured out. Some stories wrap up neatly by the end of a video, and some genuinely don't. And I'd rather tell you which category this one falls into than manufacture a tidy conclusion that isn't actually supported by the evidence we have right now. I want to hear your take on this one. Given everything we just walked through, do you think these repeated F-35 emergencies are most likely simple mechanical strain from an incredibly demanding deployment tempo? Or do you think there's something more concerning happening in that airspace that hasn't been publicly confirmed yet? There's a real defensible case on both sides here, and I genuinely don't think there's an obvious right answer, which is exactly why I'd rather hear how you're weighing the evidence than just tell you what to conclude. Drop your honest answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you've got any background in aviation maintenance, fighter operations, or anything that gives you real insight into what sustained combat tempo actually does to an aircraft this complex, I'd genuinely love to hear your take specifically, because that's exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that could actually move this conversation forward in a way outside reporting alone can't. There's one more angle worth exploring here too, and it's the question of what happens to public trust when a story like this stays unresolved for this long. Every week that passes without an official explanation for these emergencies, the space for competing narratives just keeps growing wider, and that's true regardless of which explanation eventually turns out to be correct. Silence doesn't actually protect a story from speculation, it just delays who gets to shape that speculation first. And in this case, that's meant foreign state media and information warfare channels getting the first, loudest word on all 3 incidents rather than the U.S. military itself. I think that's a genuinely important lesson that extends well beyond just this one story about F-35 emergencies. In an information environment this contested, where multiple governments and countless independent channels are all racing to shape the narrative around every single incident of this war, official silence isn't neutral. It has real consequences for which version of events ends up shaping public understanding, even when that silence is coming from entirely legitimate operational security concerns, rather than anything resembling a deliberate cover-up. That's part of why I think it's worth naming clearly, on camera, exactly what we do and don't know about each of these 3 incidents, rather than letting the loudest voices online fill in the blanks by default. You deserve a version of this story that's honest about its own limits, not one that pretends those limits don't exist just to deliver a cleaner narrative. I also want to say this plainly because it matters for how you evaluate any coverage of this exact story going forward, including from other channels that might present this with far more confidence than the evidence actually supports. Notice how differently the confirmed half of this story and the unconfirmed half were actually reported. The drone shoot-down came with a name, a squadron, a spokesperson, and a direct CENTCOM statement issued within days. The emergency squawks came with flight tracker data, foreign state media, and months of official silence stretching all the way to today. That gap in transparency is itself a piece of information worth paying attention to, regardless of what eventually turns out to have caused those emergencies, because it tells you something real about which parts of this war get explained quickly and which parts don't. Thank you so much for watching, for sticking with a story that had one clean, confirmed half and one genuinely unresolved half. Stories like this one, where I can't hand you a tidy, complete answer because one doesn't actually exist yet, are exactly why I do this the honest way, instead of just picking whichever explanation makes for a better thumbnail. It would honestly be easier, and probably would perform better in the short term, to just declare confidently that Iran shot down an American stealth fighter, or alternatively, to just as confidently declare it was nothing but routine maintenance and move on. Both of those clean, simple versions would make for a punchier video. Neither one is actually what the evidence supports right now, and I don't think that's the kind of channel I want to run. I'll keep tracking both threads of this story closely, and if there's ever an official U.S. statement clarifying what actually caused any of these three emergencies, or if any credible evidence emerges pointing toward hostile action, you're going to hear about it here, sourced properly, the same way I've tried to lay out everything in this video today. Until then, I think the honest, responsible thing to do is exactly what I've done throughout this entire breakdown: tell you clearly what's confirmed, tell you clearly what isn't, and resist the temptation to manufacture false certainty just because uncertainty doesn't make for as satisfying an ending. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing off, and I will see you in the next one.